Hello, welcome to Anita the Pedagogue channel. Today, we want to look at poetry analysis in literature, and the text we are going to use is Meeting Break by Irish poet Seamus Heaney. There's actually a part 1 version, and I'll be doing another episode which will be the part 2 version so that we can take our time and look at the analysis of the poem inside out. Let's begin. For our objectives, we will look at who our poet is. I'll read you the poem Meeting Break. We'll look at the structure or form of the poem. Then we will analyze the poem stanza by stanza. So let's begin with our poet. Now, Seamus Heaney was born in April 1939. He was an Irish poet, playwright, and translator. He received the 1995 Nobel Prize in Literature, and among his best-known works is Death of a Naturalist. He died later on in Dublin, Ireland, on 30th of August 2013, at the age of 74. Okay, we'll progress to look at our poem, Meeting Break. I'll read it out. I sat all morning in the college sick bay, counting bells, knowing classes were close. At 2 o'clock, our neighbors drove me home. In the porch, I met my father crying. He had always taken funerals in his stride, and Big Jim Evans saying it was a hard blow. The baby cooed and laughed and rocked the pram when I came in, and I was embarrassed by old men standing up to shake my hand and tell me they were sorry for my trouble. Whispers informed strangers I was the eldest. Away at school, as my mother held my hand in hers and coughed out angry tearless sighs. At 10 o'clock the ambulance arrived, with the corpse stanched and bandaged by the nurses. Next morning I went up into the room. Snowdrops and candles stood the bedside. I saw him for the first time in 6 weeks. Paler now, wearing a puppy bruise on his left temple. He lay in the 4-foot box in his cot. No gaudy scars. The bumper knocked him clear. A 4-foot box, a foot for every year. Oh, that's our poem, Meeting Break. Now we'll progress and take a look at the structure and form. But when we talk about structure and form, what do we really mean? So the structure and form of a poem refers to its physical structure. And that is, when you look at the poem, how many lines do you see? And stanzas. What are the length of the lines? Their rhythms, their system of rhymes and repetition. More often than not, it is used to describe poems which have these features obvious or very significant. Now, let's take a look at the structure of the poem Meeting Break. So first, let's take a look at the lines. How many lines does this poem have? Now, if you count from the first line, which is I sat all morning in the college sick bay, right to the last line, a 4-foot box, a foot for every year, you would realize that the lines sum up to 22 lines. We'll take a look at the stanzas. And the stanzas have 3 lines each, or tercets, except for the 7th stanza, which has 4 lines. Now let's look at the first stanza, the second stanza, our third stanza, and you'd realize that each of these stanzas have 3 lines each. Our 6th stanza and our final stanza, the 7th stanza, which has an additional line, making it 4 lines. Again, let's take a look at the last 2 lines. No Gadi scars, the bumper knocked him clear, line 21. And line 22, a 4-foot box, a foot for every year. You would realize that the end words are clear and year, and these lines rhyme as there is a repetition of the same sound. We would move on to look at the title of our poem. Now, what does the title Midterm Break tell you when you look at it? Now, when we talk about a midterm, it refers to a middle period within a school academic term, usually when there's time of school, and usually we have holidays and fun time. So the poem's title could suggest a holiday, a fun time, or a rest period. But instead, this particular poem serves as an autobiographical poem which Seamus Heaney wrote, and he wrote it as his younger self. So Midterm Break actually suggests the death of the poet's younger brother during a midterm break, perhaps. Having looked at this, we would move on to look at how to analyze a poem, and we will use stanza 1 as our example. I sat all morning in the college sick bay, counting bells, nailing classes to a close. At 2 o'clock, our neighbors drove me home. Now, when you have a poem and you need to appreciate it, analyze it, what do you need to do? You would have to take a look at all the vocabulary and make sure you are conversant with them. And you need to ask yourself questions. And these questions would help you understand the meaning of the poem. So let's take a look at some questions. 1. Who sat all morning in the college sick bay? So is the speaker. Then let's look at the second question. Why was he at the sick bay? So he might have been sick, and so at the sick bay waiting to be picked up home. Then another question, why was the bells in the classes not ringing but knelling? And take note of the word knelling. Perhaps something bad might be happening, since bells were knelling, and knelling shows, we use knelling, usually shows something solemn, a burial or a funeral. Anytime a bell is knelling, it tells you that there is a burial or a funeral. And so that suggests that something bad might be happening. Again, we look at another question. Why was it that it was his neighbors that drove him home and not his parents? You want to consider this question also. And perhaps his parents might have been busy or not available for neighbors to pick him home. Or perhaps it could also be that his parents didn't have a car. So now let's take a look at the meaning of stanza 1. Stanza 1 serves as the opening of the poem. It begins with the first line where the speaker is sitting at the sick bay, clueless and in isolation. In the second line, you realize that the speaker spends time counting the bells that indicate classes have ended. And the speaker uses the word knelling to show the bells sounded solemn, like a funeral or a burial. Again, the third line adds that at 2 o'clock, he was picked up by neighbors home. This line further raises questions as to where the speaker's parents were, and why it had to be neighbors who had to pick him. The bells, symbolizing death or a funeral, tells you, the reader of the poem, that perhaps the rest of the poem will be something as serious as death. Now we move on to look at our second stanza. Now in the second stanza, the speaker has finally arrived home from school, and surprisingly he notices his father crying on the porch of their home. And this is quite shocking and surprising because men, especially in our society, are usually seen as strong and they hardly show emotions like crying. Again, the speaker shows some emphasis on his shock by saying that his father had always taken funerals in his stride. This means his father never showed how affected he is by a funeral or ever displayed his grief or sadness due to the death of a person. However, at this very instance, he shows deep proof of how affected he is by the current funeral. In addition, a neighbor, Big Jim Evans, tells him how the loss of his relative is a tough situation and a hard blow for his father. So this brings us to the end of our analysis for stanza 2. We'll progress to stanza 3. And comparing line 7 to the rest of the stanzas, it is the part of the poem that especially shows a lot of joy instead of anxiety and grief, because the innocent baby cooed and laughed, and this shows that even in the midst of the grief and the trouble of mourning a loved one, life still moves on. Again, the speaker is embarrassed as he suddenly has to try to grow into adulthood, having old men standing up to shake his hand. He does not know, however, the way to respond to this as he is still a young boy. Again, at this point, you begin to wonder whose funeral it is as a reader. Let's look at stanza 4. In our fourth stanza, the old men and guests at the funeral extend their condolences and show how deeply sorry they were for his loss, especially because he is the eldest child of his parents. Here again, it is quite obvious that it is not his mother who has died, as she is there holding his hand as all the mourners greet him. We'll move on to stanza 5. In stanza 5, the mother of the speaker shows how deeply the loss has affected her, as she coughs out angry, tearless sighs. Again, the use of the expression angry, tearless sighs shows the pain, anger, and torment she is going through. And in line 14 and 15, the ambulance arrives with the corpse stanched and bandaged. This tells you, the reader, that the deceased is no longer bleeding and the wounds have been covered up by the nurses. And this gives you, the reader, an insight again that the loss must have been due to some sort of accident, leaving the body with blood that was flowing and with wounds. This brings us to the end of our stanza 5. We'll quickly move on to stanza 6. Now in stanza 6, the speaker musters courage to go meet his loved one who had died. And the mention of snowdrops and candles quite make the scene of the speaker and his loved one quite endurable. Again, as snowdrops are flowers that usually pop up during winter and always brings hope that very soon warmth will come, and that is summer. So snowdrops represents hope, and candles as well represents hope, or light, or peace in the midst of darkness. It is the first time in 6 weeks the speaker will be meeting him, that is the deceased. And the words "paler now" describes the lifeless body of the loved one. Also, at this point, it can be said that since it is not the speaker's mother or father that is deceased, It could be a relative of his and perhaps a sibling. We move on to our final stanza, stanza 7. The final stanza and the last line reveals the deceased person as well as the cause of his death. The speaker describes the bruise on his temple with poppy, a red herbal flower. It is usually used to show death, peace, and sleep. He continues to say that there were no serious scars, despite the fact that he was knocked down by the bumper of a car. And in the last line, the age of the speaker's relative is revealed. His 4-foot box, a euphemism, which stands for a coffin, shows the size and age of the deceased. The 4-foot has a foot representing each year of his life. And here we are able to gather so far that this 4-year-old boy is the speaker's brother. Now this brings us to the end of our lesson on midterm break analysis, part 1, and the second episode is just on the way. I do hope this lesson was useful to you. Please put in your comments and questions and I'll respond to them. Do like, share and subscribe to this channel. Until I come your way again, keep learning and be the best version of yourself.